but I am sure that please take up this, may not be identical concept, but something similar where you pay your debt, your indebtedness to your alma mater in a manner that your future colleagues who pass through this institute are definitely benefited. So one is the human capital. The second issue which is definitely threatening, which can come in the way of 2020, is the effect of climate change. All of us are aware that global warming is a real threat. India just started to awakening since Dr. Rajendra Pachuri has to be being the chairman of IPCC. Till last year, I remember talking to some ministers and all that. We're doing a lot of work in that area, so I can talk to you more confidently. Our entire business model is around that. Very few bureaucrats and ministers were aware that such kind of a terminology, such kind of threat is existing. It's as good as 1 year or 2 years back. This is a real threat and it's going to upset our plans. This climate, water, what we call is Panchamahabhuta are going into imbalance, and this imbalance is going to affect the normal life. It can affect business, it can affect economy. The content expenditure and all those things can come in the way. Shortage of water, power consumption, creating carbon dioxide, all these things have to be looked into meticulously, and as a young generation, I find that young generation is more sensitive to these areas. When my own son, who is 21 years old, is asking me what we are doing for green purchasing, green engineering, what are you doing? I am sure the next generation can take this more seriously and with more conviction. The third issue which is to my mind is about attitude of educated and the middle class to challenge the current systems and practices. We read about the story of middle class turning their back for the wrongdoings happening in the society, not going for voting, not exercising their powers democracy has given to them. And somewhere I think, again, new generation as a part of the roadmap has to keep in mind that come what may, I will exercise my right of voting. I will not turn my back if there is an accident taking place. And the last point which comes to my mind is lack of inclusive growth. As CII, we have taken this as a big mandate, and we feel this is the responsibility of each and everyone, that inclusive growth is very crucial, that bridging the gap between India and Bharat is responsibility of each individual. To reduce that poverty line will happen only if we are sensitive to these observations. I like you have kept a provision for sustainability. The four forces, we have heard of triple bottom line. For me, for our own company, we have formed the balance of four forces, which are, of course, profit is the first prime force, people is the second, planet, of course, is the third, and we have added change or growth as the fourth parameter. We want growth by keeping all these three parameters in balance, in harmony. I think these are the four major parameters, the major drivers which can fulfill our task of Vision 2020. Friends, most of you will be in pink of your careers 10, 12 years down the line, as a pink or very interesting thresholds. Please just do not wait to reap the harvest of what has happened in the past. Please contribute in whatever small or big way. Please be the part of future visions beyond obvious. You may join infrastructure, you may join telephony, you may join retails, which are the normal things. But please look beyond the obvious, what that your job or your responsibility offers. Time is on your side. I don't know how it's going to remain in that manner as a guarantee. So, like your film said, instead of a job seeker, you should become a job provider. And my favorite statement for young generation is that please dream to dare and dare to dream. Let your vision come true. God bless you. Thank you very much.
We have with us Honorable Vice Chancellor, Dr. Narendra Jadhav. I request Dr. B.V. Sankar to welcome Sir with a bouquet of flowers. He holds a doctorate in economics from Indiana University, for which he won the Best International Student Award. He also won the award for outstanding contribution to economic theory from Indiana University. He took over as Vice Chancellor of University of Pune on 24th of August 2006. Prior, he had been working with Reserve Bank of India since 1977. He has served in various capacities and was the head of Department of Economic Analysis and Policy of the RBI. He served as the advisor to the Executive Director of IMF during the period 1998 to 2002. He has written many books and has been awarded the Maharashtra Sahitya Parishad Award for his book, Dr. Ambedkar, Economic Thought and Philosophy. In order to help management graduates stay abreast with the latest changes and demands of the industry, Sir has revised and restructured the traditional MBA course and through corporate interaction has devised a new course, MBA++, which is functional through this year. I would now request Dr. Narendra Jadhav to come up on the dais.
Chief guest of the function today, my friend Pramod Chaudhary, Dr. P.V. Sangvikar, Professor and Head of PUMBA, other dignitaries on the dais, off the stage, and my student friends. It's indeed a great pleasure as well as an honor to be here. At the very outset, I would like to apologize for being late. There was a slight communication gap. I came back from Mumbai late last night, and I spoke to my secretary before reaching Pune, and somehow he was under the impression that this program begins at 9 o'clock and not at 8:15 as was revised. So when Sangvikar called me, I was not ready and I told my driver to come at 8:30. So there was a delay. Normally I try not to reach late for any function, especially public functions, but today is one of those days and I sincerely express my apologies for that. Well, I would like to take this opportunity to congratulate Dr. P.V. Sangvikar and all his colleagues for organizing this National Seminar 2008 on a theme of India Vision 2020. The response clearly shows that the choice of the subject and the organization has been truly splendid, and I'm truly delighted to be here. And I could get most of, if not all, of what my friend Pramod Chaudhary spoke, and I must commend him for a brilliant exposition coming from his rich experience and telling his version of the India story and why Vision India 2020 is needed. He has touched upon many critical components of the India story so far and the way it is going to unfold in future. I'm going to talk about similar thing, but the accent would be slightly different. I want to spend some time on the corporate social responsibility aspect particularly. If I look at India for the last several years, he talked about the 1991 crisis and the changes, the fall in Berlin Wall and the changes in liberalization, Nehruvian era, the Rajiv era, and the kind of changes that started. I want to give you my version of the story. I was with the Reserve Bank of India for a very long time. As you know, about 27 years I was with them. And when the crisis took place in 1991, I was very much there. I was part of the team addressing the crisis. In fact, I still clearly remember the day when we had to take, you see, 1991, it was May 16, 1991. That was the time when there was hardly any government worth the name in the center, because there was a minority government supported by big parties from outside. And there was a big policy vacuum, and that was when the crisis hit. And it was the dreadful day of 16th May 1991, when Reserve Bank had to take a very bold decision of swapping 47 tons of gold with the Bank of England. Situation was so bad that our foreign exchange reserve had dwindled to a level of less than $1 billion, which meant that we had only 2 weeks equivalent of our imports, foreign exchange equivalent of only 2 weeks of our import requirement. So we were on the verge of bankruptcy. It was a situation so bad, no country, no international institution was willing to give us any loan. That is why we had to take a very harsh and unpleasant decision of actually swapping 47 tons of our gold, and that had to be done because that was used as a collateral. Without the collateral of gold, no country in the world was prepared to give us loan. And I consider that as the lowest ebb of India's economic growth and development in the last 60 years. So looking at the last 60 years, how have we traveled? How did we come to this 1991 crisis? I think one can look at it this way. We became independent in 1947. We started the so-called planned economic development in 1951. And during those 40 years after that, 1951 to 1991, while we were told that we are making very solid progress under the socialistic pattern of society, actually the results were extremely lukewarm. Results were actually very inadequate. Just look at one parameter, the growth, that's one common parameter. Between 1951 and 1980, for 30 years, what was our growth rate? Our growth rate averaged 3.5%. And our growth rate that time, during this entire period, 1951 to 1991, was always around 3.5%. Little bit more, little bit less, the average would always be 3.5%. So unique was that phenomena that 3.5% growth was being called by one great Indian economist. He called it Hindu rate of growth, because it was kind of 3.5%. We were stuck with 3.5% growth. And we had come to believe that that is our fate, that this is 3.5% growth is our fate. This was what was accepted widely. Our growth was at 3.5%. Our population was growing on an average at the rate of 2.2%, which meant that our per capita income was growing at a measly rate of only 1.3% per year. Now, 1.3% per year growth in per capita income is not impressive at all by any standards. That is why I said that our performance was left much to be desired. At 1.3% growth in per capita income, how long will it take to double the standard of living? It would have taken, at that rate, 59 years to double the standard of living. How do you calculate that? The formula is 72 divided by the rate of growth, and that gives you the number of years it will take to double. So it would have taken us 59 years to double our standard of living. Pandit Jawaharlal Nehru, whose mention was made very appropriately by our friend Pramod Chaudhary, he had shown us a dream before our independence that after independence we will double our standard of living every 10 years. But the rate at which we actually grew between 1951 and 1981, it would have taken us 59 years to double our standard of living. So clearly, there was a huge gap between promise and performance. When China could do it in 11 years, when Malaysia could do it in 14 years, when Indonesia could do it in 16 years, why was it that we were going to take 59 years to double our standard of living? That is the question that we must ask when we look back then and look at the future from here onwards. So if I want to present it very quickly, a balance sheet, what has happened in 60 years, I would like to highlight 4 major achievements for these 60 years. First and the most important achievement, which is not always understood as properly as possible, as is required, is that we as a nation could stand up as a democratic nation. Please do not underestimate, this is our greatest achievement in the last 60 years. Just before we got independence, Winston Churchill, everybody knows Winston Churchill, he had written a letter to the then British King just before we got our freedom, before the tries with destiny. And it said that in 50 years, this country will go back to thugs and rogues. Worldwide, all the leaders were saying that the experiment of democracy is not going to succeed in India. This is a poor country. There were 2 challenges. One was this country had always been divided into so many religions, so many castes and creeds. So a country which is so widely divided, and that too a poor economy, a very, very poor country. With combining these two, most scholars at that time believed that the experiment of democracy is not going to succeed. And therefore I say that our biggest achievement 60 years after our independence is to see that democracy has not only thrived, has been institutionalized, it is indeed thriving. In fact, world does not give us enough credit, but there is no country in the world where 500 million people go to polls and a change of power takes place without any bloodshed. This is revolutionary. This is a huge change. In fact, I keep telling my American friends, looking at what happened in the Florida presidential elections in Florida, in the United States, I tell them that not only you should outsource IT to India, you should also consider outsourcing your elections to India, because we can do better. In a continental country like India, with such difficult terrain, as many as 500 million people go to polls and bring about a change in a democratic manner, this is remarkable. Just look around India, look at Pakistan is of course obvious example, but look around all countries around India, nowhere democracy has taken the roots the way it has in India. This is not to say our democracy is perfect, there are many problems, but with all that, fact remains that we have stood up as a very strong democratic nation. In fact, we are the most populous democracy of India, and that is an achievement that I would like to start with. That is the most important achievement of Nehru era in particular, and we have continued that tradition. So that's one. Second achievement, now I come to, I explained to you the story up to 1991. What had happened was the growth rate was poor, our fiscal deficit during the 80s, Pramod did not talk much about 80s. He rightly observed that the beginning of liberalization was in the 1980s. Yes, that is absolutely correct. But 1980s would be characterized in Indian literature, Indian economic literature, as a decade where there was enormous fiscal profligacy. The governments were living, central government and many state governments were living way out of their means. The budget deficits were extremely high. In fact, that is what precipitated the crisis in 1991. I don't mind sharing with you, in 1989, along with Dr. C. Rangarajan, who was at that time the Deputy Governor of Reserve Bank of India, I wrote a paper, it's Rangarajan and Jadhav paper, which is very well known in economic literature, where we had shown that the budget deficit was going completely out of hands. In fact, we introduced the concept of fiscal deficit. Until then, the way we were measuring budget deficit was itself wrong. It was only an accounting identity. It did not have any economic meaning. So we made a switch from the budget deficit to fiscal deficit. From there onwards, we are only talking about fiscal deficit. Fiscal deficit, we said, was out of hands, and with a mathematical model, we showed that if we do not arrest the fiscal deficit, it is going to lead to a major crisis. And it was, crisis was inevitable, unavoidable, unless we showed the political courage and will to contain our fiscal deficit. But that paper was circulated to all the powers that be at that time. And but as always, we thought that nothing will happen to such a big country. But then we did have The crisis hit exactly as was predicted. Even the timing was predicted. The crisis hit us at that time with political instability, slow growth, mounting fiscal deficit. There was a crisis. And you will recall that when Dr. Manmohan Singh took over as the finance minister, the very first thing that he did was to reduce the fiscal deficit. At that time, it was 9.3% of GDP. Ideally, for a developing country like India, fiscal deficit is supposed to be not more than, that time thinking was 4%, now thinking is 3%. And that's our target now. 3% of GDP is the limit for fiscal deficit, which we have now enforced by law. But at that time, our fiscal deficit as a ratio of GDP was as high as 9.3% of GDP. And that had to be brought down, and that was how Dr. Manmohan Singh started his reform policy. Then came the liberalization, part privatization, globalization, and so on. And what has happened in the last 14, 15 years, the reforms are now 14 years old, more than 14 years old, 1991. There was a mention about China. Remember that China started reforms way before us. In 1978, China started reforms. There was no crisis. On their own, they started doing reforms without any crisis. Whereas in India, we were woken up from our slumber